He was even older than Atefeh's own father.
Number 3. Mary. Mary was an American enslaved teenager who was hanged for the slaying of Vienna Brinker, a 2-year-old girl she was babysitting. Her case was notable both for her youth and for the extended legal process that preceded her punishment. Although her exact age is unknown, it is generally agreed that she is the youngest person to have suffered capital punishment in Missouri. Mary's original owner was Abraham Brinker, Vienna's grandfather. Abraham was slain by Indians southwest of Potosi in Washington County, Missouri in 1833. He perished without a will, and his widow Fanny and son John became administrators of his estate. John appropriated Mary for himself and eventually made her the babysitter for Vienna Jane, his daughter. Mary, described as shrewd and remarkably fond of children, was about 13 at the time she allegedly slaughtered the toddler on May 14, 1837. On May 14, 1837, the body of Vienna Brinker was discovered in a stream on the Brinker property. She had suffered blunt trauma to her right temple. John Brinker's wife Sarah had asked Mary to gather firewood, and she took Vienna with her. She later returned to the house without Vienna and claimed not to know where she was. John Brinker gathered 2 of his neighbors, William Blackwell and Thomas Shirley, to help search for his daughter. They eventually followed Mary's footsteps down to the stream, where Shirley found her body. Some sources have speculated that Mary butchered Vienna because her father was planning to sell her. Just why Mary committed the slaying may never be known, but she admitted destroying Vienna Jane, at least once Mary was tied to a log and interrogated by the sheriff, who began to act as though he were going to whip Mary, and her guilt was taken as given throughout her surprisingly protracted 15-month legal odyssey. The jury found her and sentenced her to her end. Mary's lawyers, there were 3 of them, appealed on several grounds, but her age was not one of them. The appellate court granted her a second trial on a technicality, but she was convicted again and did not appeal further. Contemporary newspapers reported Mary's age as either 13 or 14, while a later account in the history of Crawford County gave it as 16. The trial judge, James Evans, had instructed the jury to consider whether Mary was above the age of criminal responsibility, which was 14 at the time, or whether she was below that age, but had a sufficient mind to know what action would be a crime. Number 2. Atefeh Rajabi Sahale. Atefeh Rajabi Sahale was a 16-year-old schoolgirl from the town of Nika, Iran, who was fatally punished a week after being sentenced to her end by Haji Rezai, head of Nika's clerical court, on charges of adultery and crimes against chastity. Rezai, who served as the prosecutor and judge in the case, carried out the punishment of the teenager himself by placing the noose around Atefeh's neck before she was hoisted on a crane to her demise, telling her, "This will teach you to disobey." The punishment is controversial because, as a signatory of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Iran promised not to fatally punish anyone under the age of 18. Atefeh's father had passed her birth certificate to the civil authorities, lawyers involved, journalists, and Judge Rezai himself, but according to a witness, the judge just looked at her body because of the developed physique and declared her as 22. Pursuant to continual complaints filed by Atefeh's family about her punishment and the way the judge mishandled the case, the Supreme Court of Iran issued an order to free Atefeh, only to be 3 weeks too late. Atefeh's mother perished in a car accident when she was 5. Her father became a drug addict, and she was forced to care for her grandparents. Despite her attending to their needs, they are reported to have completely ignored her. She grew up in the town of Nika, Iran, and was described as a lively and intelligent girl who everyone knew, and was often seen wandering free on the streets because of this. She was called the Gypsy of Nika by the locals. She was arrested 3 times by the moral police and convicted of having physical relations with unmarried men. On each occasion, she was jailed and given 100 lashes. On the day she was due to attend a wedding, the moral police arrested her as she was preparing dinner for her grandparents. As she had not committed an offense, a petition was presented declaring her a bad influence. It was not signed. She was convicted for crimes against chastity based on her admission, obtained through torture, that she had repeatedly had relations with a 51-year-old ex-Revolutionary Guard turned taxi driver, Ali Darabi, a married man with children, but the truth was this horrid man had physically exploited her. She kept this horrible situation a secret for 3 years from both her family and the authorities, since she already had charges of indecency against her, and it was unlikely that anyone would believe her. In the court, the judge was Hannah Rajabi. As Atefeh realized she was losing her case, she removed her hijab, an act seen as severe contempt of the court, and argued that Ali Darabi should be punished, not her. She even removed her shoes and hit the judge with them. The judge later sentenced her to her end. After the punishment, he boasted that she had been taught a lesson for her sharp tongue. Her father was not notified of her execution. The next day, her body was stolen from her grave. It has never been recovered. Amnesty International and many other human rights organizations from the international community declared her punishment to be a crime against humanity and against children of the world. Number 1. Hannah Ocuish. December 20, 1786, the sheriff of New London led a trembling young woman to a set of gallows erected in the rear of a meeting house. He hooded her, placed a rope around her neck, then, after her brief statement, hanged her in front of a large crowd of spectators. The young woman was actually not a woman at all, but a 12-year-old mentally disabled Pequot Nation Native American girl named Hannah Ocuish. She was charged, convicted, and fatally punished for the slaying of a 6-year-old white girl named Eunice Bowles. Like most end-row prisoners even today, Hannah was not only intellectually disabled, but a product of a neglectful and harsh childhood, shuffled in and out of foster homes by her alcoholic mother. A description of Hannah's life and crime, published alongside a transcript of Reverend Henry Channing's sermon, pointed out that Hannah's mother was an abandoned creature, much addicted to the vice of drunkenness. In fact, at age 6, Hannah was charged with beating another child almost to their end while trying to steal her necklace, leaving the toddler stripped and bloodied. Court officials eventually took Hannah from her mother and bound her out as a servant of a widow. On July 21, 1786, a Norwich resident found Eunice's body at the side of the main road beside a stone wall just outside of town. She displayed extreme trauma. Reports said her head was covered with stones, and a number lay upon its back and arms. Upon examining the body, its skull appeared to be fractured, the arms and face much bruised, and the prints of fingernails were very deep on the throat. Police questioned many people, including Hannah, who denied any involvement, but recalled that she had seen a group of boys on the road earlier, and perhaps they were the guilty party. Not believing her, they closely questioned her a second time the next day, but again, she repeatedly denied that she was guilty. Finally, the investigators took Hannah to the Bowles house to see Eunice's body. Hannah reportedly burst into tears and confessed that she destroyed the girl, imploring that she would never do something like that again if she could be forgiven. At her trial, where she pleaded not guilty, Hannah, most likely because of her youth and diminished mental capacity, appeared to onlookers and jury to be unconcerned about the trouble she was in. Hannah testified that she sought revenge against little Eunice because the child had reported her for stealing strawberries that she had picked 5 weeks earlier. Then, on July 21, as Hannah carried a pail of water from a nearby brook, she saw Eunice walking to school by herself. She confessed that she walked to the girl and offered her a piece of calico. When Eunice approached, Hannah repeatedly beat her in the head with a rock, then choked her to her end and covered her body with rocks to make people think that the wall fell upon her and destroyed her. Hannah was arrested on the basis of this confession. No other evidence was collected against her, but there were also no other reported suspects. Reverend Channing wrote, "Such an instance of deliberate revenge and cruelty in one so young has scarcely a parallel in any civilized country." Hannah was found guilty of slaying and sentenced to her end. By early December, while in jail awaiting her punishment, Hannah began displaying remorse over her plight. Visitors asked her how long she had to live, and they reported she would count the days with manifest agitation. Witnesses of the hanging hours later reported that Hannah seemed greatly afraid when at the gallows. With her last words, she thanked the sheriff for his kindness and launched into the eternal world. Hannah Ocuish is considered the youngest person fatally punished in the U.S., and we likely will never know if she really committed the crime. That's all for today's video. We'll see you next time.